Today our church celebrates the memorial of St. Alphonsus Liguori. He lived in the 1800s and was, as a young man, grew up in a noble family and was a person of, a family of means, from a family of means, and pursued academics and was just brilliant and received doctorates in both canon law and civil law, which probably was more common. Now it seems like those are on different sides of the planet, but he had both of those and was very successful. But some things happened in the beginning of his career that made him kind of question, where is God leading me? He was 26, I think, and just kept feeling a call to be of total service to Christ, and that led him to seek the priesthood. And his father was a little upset with him because he thought, this law career is a good thing for you, and that's an understandable thing, but could tell that he was really resolved to do that. But he was very dedicated to especially the poor, not just in Naples, Italy, where he lived, which is a big metropolitan area, but all throughout the region there, where he saw people who just nobody was giving attention to. And then others became interested in the work he was doing, and that became the beginnings of the Redemptorist order, like Holy Redeemer Parish in North Portland and Redemptorists around the world. But he also was still a theologian, and as the order formed, he also wrote books on moral theology. And what was unique about his at that time there was sort of a legalism and rigidity about it. But he had all this experience with people in pastoral settings that still you might come to the same conclusions, but with a clear understanding of, how we kind of grow into our understanding of God's mercy and conforming our lives. It just takes a while. We need to be patient with ourselves rather than just a black and white understanding of morality. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill the law. This question came up because Jesus was often interpreting the law differently than the scribes and the Pharisees around him. And so he was often criticized, thinking that he was abandoning the law. But he was showing, or perhaps drawing attention to its fuller meaning. And his audience that were not accepting that were people who only saw it at the superficial or legalistic approach. And one way to think of it might be this, because the point Jesus is making is, if you really understand the law, then you're going to do far more than the minimum that the law requires. The smallest jot in what it says, the exact quote. It's, let me make sure I have it correctly here. St. Alphonsus, he says, I've come the smallest letter and the smallest part of a letter. Those are in Hebrew writing, they're little tiny accents that are put in there, or little dots. Even those little tiny things of the letter of the law are important. And it sounds legalistic, but what he's saying is, if you love God with everything that you are, then you're not going to be limited by the mere prescriptions of the law. You're going to go far beyond that. Here's some examples maybe. When you look at the global population and how Americans deal with law, we have a rule of law. I mean, there's protests and civil disobedience that are a little different. But for the most part, Americans are really good about following law, staying in their lane. Where in Italy or Mexico City, good Lord, I remember riding in a taxi cab. There might be 3 defined lanes, but there are 5 cars across. There's just sort of like, the lanes are sort of a suggestion, just don't hit anybody or the buildings, It's what it seems to be. Same in Vietnam, But here, we really get upset if somebody gets outside their lane, We tend to follow the rules and the regulations that are there. And I've been in conversation with people from other countries, and here's my theory that I throw out there. It sounds good, may not be true, but I say a lot of those countries, they have centuries of history or even recent history of either absolute power of monarchies or dictatorships. And democracy is relatively new, whereas here we've only known democracy in our country and culture. We make our laws, so we tend to obey our laws because we have some say in them. And if you feel like you have no say, then what should I care whether I follow that law or not? It's not my law. I don't care about it. Somebody else imposed it on me. So I think that's one thing. But we tend to realize we have ownership in that. So that's one way to look at it. Here's another way, even better. Cynically, marriage is sometimes referred to as being tied down, the old ball and chain, which is sad because it's a cynical approach. But and sometimes people are afraid of commitment, so they're, I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of relationship. But when you really are in love with somebody, then you won't do just the bare minimum of what's required to show love and compassion to that person. You want to go far beyond what's expected out of love for that person, and especially even and parents for children. True love is going to take us far beyond just the little tiny particles of the letter of the law, because we want what's best for that person out of love, not just the minimum required. So when we see the life of St. Alphonsus Liguori, he understood law. He had a doctorate in law, canon law, civil law. But he spent his entire life in service to God, and he wanted to draw people into love of Jesus. Then you get the moral life, because you want to please the Lord. Not just pleasing the Lord in the sense of obeying, that's part of it, but more pleasing the Lord in the sense of fulfilling what he came to do, to love unselfishly, to be absolutely giving, and not worry about, well, what are my rights? And what do I absolutely have to do to fulfill this requirement? You say, what does that person need? Oh, I'll give you whatever I have. That's a different approach. And St. Alphonsus Liguori, I believe, when he teaches the law, if we understand the law, we're going to do far more than is necessary in the moral life, because we do it out of love for Christ. So I think that's probably a more important enterprise, rather than just laying down law and order. This is what the church teaches, and you must believe it, is come to love Christ, and then your hunger for all the things that are of faith. And when you look at our world, even with the Redemptorists, I was thinking about that this morning. The Redemptorist order, they used to operate Holy Redeemer Parish. They started that, but now they've just don't have as many vocations in the United States. But I spoke to a Redemptorist a few years ago, and he was saying how even the provinces in the U.S. have to consolidate because they're getting small. And that can be discouraging. But what that Redemptorist, what he was telling me was, what he does, he works in Africa, in Nigeria. And I said, how are the vocations going over there? He goes, oh, well, I run a seminary. You can't build seminaries fast enough for the number of vocations that are coming in. So in the secularized world of the so-called developed nations, we're drifting from faith, but in many parts of the world, Korea, a lot of parts of Africa, Vietnam, they can't get, their seminaries need to grow. And religious orders, they're really increasing. And I just think it's that they get that sense of dependence, where here I think our effort and our greatest desire is for absolute independence. Well, sometimes that just means independence from God too. I want to make my own rules, and we're going to miss the fullness of life if we do that. So I just think there's hope throughout the world, and we see that in the life of Alphonsus Liguori. He was that for his day, and there are people of that for our day now. But it just starts with fundamentally falling in love with Christ, making Christ the center of our lives, and then everything else makes sense after that.